In the heart of the Maasai lands, where the sun scorched the earth and the wind carried the scent of acacia trees, lived a young woman whose dreams soared far beyond the rolling plains. Her name was Nasirian, and her spirit was as free as the birds that wheeled across the cloudless skies. Though the customs of her people bound many young women to marriage at an early age, Nasirian harbored a different vision. She dreamed of becoming a teacher. Nasirian's home was a cluster of mud huts in a Maasai village, where the men tended cattle and the women bore the responsibility of raising children and gathering firewood. The traditions ran deep here, shaping every aspect of life, including the destinies of its young. But even from a young age, Nasirian had felt the stirrings of a different future. While other girls her age spoke of marriage, Nasirian spoke of books, of classrooms, and the power of knowledge. Her mother, Nasa, had always been proud of her eldest daughter's curiosity, but Nasirian's father, Olepasha, a proud and respected man of the village, saw her ambitions as a threat. In his eyes, a woman's place was beside her husband, not in the world of learning. For generations, their family had honored Maasai customs, and Nasirian's defiance felt like a rejection of everything they stood for. Nasirian, Olepasha would say, his voice stern, the ways of the modern world are not our ways. You are of the Maasai. You will marry, as is our custom. But Nasirian's heart beat with the rhythm of a different drum. The thought of standing before a classroom of young minds, teaching them to read and write, filled her with a joy she could barely contain. Still, the conflict between father and daughter grew with each passing year. Her decision to delay marriage was becoming the talk of the village, with elders and peers casting disapproving glances her way. But Nasirian held on to her dream, determined to change her destiny, no matter the cost. One evening, under the vast African sky, Nasirian and Olepasha stood at the edge of their boma, their family's cattle lowing in the distance. The stars twinkled overhead, a silent witness to the argument that had simmered for days. Nasirian, it is time you accepted your role, Olepasha said, his voice low but firm. A man from a neighboring village has asked for your hand. It is a good match. The elders approve. Nasirian clenched her fists, feeling the weight of her father's expectations pressing down on her. She had always known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier. Father, she began, her voice trembling but steady, I do not want to marry. I want to learn. I want to become a teacher. Olepasha's eyes darkened. A teacher? And what will the village think? That I have raised a daughter who defies our customs? Do you think you are better than your mother, your aunts, or the women of this village? Nasirian's heart pounded. It's not about being better, father. It's about having choices. I want to choose my own path. A silence fell between them. In the distance, the faint sounds of drums and singing could be heard as the village prepared for another night of celebration. But here, in the shadow of tradition, father and daughter stood on opposite sides of an invisible line. Nasirian's mother, Nasa, stepped out of the hut, her face lined with worry. She glanced at her daughter, then at her husband, sensing the storm brewing. Olepasha, she is still young. Perhaps we can give her time? But Olepasha shook his head. No, Nasa, she must learn her place. This is not the way of our people. As the argument continued, Nasirian's younger sister, Enkai, stood quietly nearby, watching her older sister with wide eyes. Enkai, only 13, admired Nasirian's bravery, but the fear of what lay ahead for both of them was evident on her face. The tension in the family grew, and Nasirian felt like a stranger in her own home. The village elders, too, had started whispering about her, warning Olepasha that Nasirian's rebellion would bring shame upon their family. But Nasirian refused to back down. She knew that if she did not stand up for herself now, her dream would die, and with it, a part of her soul. Weeks turned into months, And just as Nasirian feared her dream would wither under the weight of her family's demands, a letter arrived. It was a scholarship offer from a school in Nairobi, a golden opportunity that could change everything. Her teachers had seen her potential and worked tirelessly to secure her a place at one of the best schools in the city. For the first time in weeks, Nasirian felt hope flutter in her chest. But sharing this news with her family was another matter entirely. As she approached her father with the letter, her heart pounded in her chest. "Father, I have been offered a scholarship," she said, holding out the letter. "This is my chance to become what I've always dreamed of, a teacher." Olepaasha took the letter from her, his face unreadable. He read it slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. When he finished, he handed it back without a word. "Please, father," Naserian pleaded. "This is my future. Let me go to Nairobi. Let me prove myself." For a long moment, Olepasha said nothing. His silence was a heavy weight that hung between them. Finally he spoke, his voice as cold as the night wind. "If you leave Naserian, you are no longer my daughter. The Maasai do not need teachers. They need wives, mothers, and daughters who know their place." Naserian's throat tightened, but she did not back down. She had made her choice. With tears in her eyes, she nodded. "Then I will go." Nairobi was a world away from Nasirian's village. The city was vast and bustling, filled with towering buildings, busy streets, and a sea of unfamiliar faces. The moment she stepped off the bus, Nasirian felt the full weight of her decision. She was alone in a place that seemed to swallow her whole. The school was even more daunting. Nasirian, with her traditional Maasai jewelry and bright red shuka, stood out among the other students. Her classmates were from the city, dressed in Western clothes, fluent in English, and with a different rhythm to their lives. They whispered and giggled when she passed, mocking her accent, her clothing, her very presence. In the dormitories, she often ate alone, the sting of isolation settling deep into her bones. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, missing the familiar sounds of cattle lowing and the wind rustling through the trees back home. Here, in the city, there was only the hum of traffic and the constant chatter of a world that felt too fast, too foreign. But despite the loneliness, Nasirian threw herself into her studies. The scholarship was her lifeline, and she refused to let the weight of prejudice or homesickness break her. Her grades began to rise, and soon her teachers noticed her intelligence, her determination. Slowly, she started to make friends, other students who, like her, were outsiders in some way. But even as she built a new life, the tug of home never left her. In the quiet moments, she thought of Enkai, of her mother, and of Lekuta. Lekuta, her childhood friend, who had always been a quiet but steady presence in her life, now seemed like a distant memory. Before she left, there had been talk in the village of Lekuta being a potential suitor, but neither of them had ever spoken of it. Now she wondered what he thought of her decision. Would he be angry, disappointed, or perhaps he was already preparing to marry someone else, as tradition demanded? As Nasirian battled her own inner doubts, Lekuta back in the village faced his own struggles. His family had begun to pressure him to marry, reminding him that he was of age and that the elders expected him to honor his duties. Yet his thoughts often drifted to Nasirian, the girl who had dared to leave. Months passed, and soon it was time for Nasirian to return to her village for a short break. She hoped to find peace in the familiarity of home, but as she arrived, she was met with troubling news. Her younger sister, Enkai, was being prepared for marriage. The village elders had arranged a match with a family from a nearby village, and the preparations were already underway. Nasirian's heart sank. Enkai was only 13, barely older than Nasirian had been when her own path had diverged from tradition. Worse still, Enkai had dreams of her own. She had spoken often of wanting to study, to follow in Nasirian's footsteps, but now it seemed those dreams were about to be crushed. As Nasirian sat with her sister, one night, watching the flickering firelight, she saw the fear and resignation in Enkai's eyes. "Do you want this?" Nasirian asked gently, though she already knew the answer. Enkai shook her head. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but what choice do I have? Father won't listen. The elders have already decided." Nasirian's anger flared. How could this be happening again after everything she had fought for? The village might still see her as a rebel, but she could not, would not, let Enkai suffer the same fate. She made a decision that night. She would fight for her sister's right to choose, even if it meant standing up to her father once again. The next morning, Nasirian sought out her father. She found him by the cattle kraal, supervising the herdsmen. His face was lined with the weight of years and the burden of tradition, but Nasirian's resolve was strong. "Father, I need to speak with you," she said, her voice firm. Ole Pasha turned to her, his expression guarded. "What is it now, Nasirian? Have you not had your way enough?" "It's about Enkai," she said, stepping closer. "She does not want to marry. She wants to study, just like I did." Ole Pasha's face darkened. "This is not your concern. Enkai will do as she is told. She is not like you." "But she is like me," Nasirian insisted, her voice rising. "She has dreams, father, dreams that are bigger than the village, bigger than marriage. Why can't you see that?" Ole Pasha's hands tightened into fists at his sides. "You shame this family with your words. Enkai will marry as tradition demands. That is the way of our people." Nazirian's heart pounded in her chest. She had faced this battle before, but this time the stakes felt even higher. She had already left home to follow her own path, but now her sister's future hung in the balance, and she knew she couldn't stand by and do nothing. "Father, I respect our traditions," Nasirian said, her voice quieter now, but no less determined. "But times are changing. The world is changing. If we don't give Enkai the chance to choose her own future, she will resent us, just as I did." Ole Pasha's jaw tightened, but Nasirian could see a flicker of something in his eyes, doubt perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of understanding. He turned away, staring out at the horizon. "Go back to school, Nasirian," he said finally, his voice gruff. "This is not your fight." But Nasirian shook her head. "It is my fight, father. Enkai deserves the same chance I had. I won't leave until she gets it." The village elders gathered that evening, summoned by Ole Pasha to discuss the matter of Enkai's marriage. Nasirian stood before them, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. She had faced these men before, men who held the weight of tradition in their hands, men who had shaped the very fabric of the village's life. But tonight she would not back down. "Elders," she began, addressing them with the respect they were due, "I stand here today not just as Nasirian, the daughter of Ole Pasha, but as a woman who has seen the world beyond our village. I have learned, I have grown, and I have come back with the knowledge that the world is changing." The elders exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disapproval. One of them, Mzi Parejo, spoke up. "You have defied our customs once before, Nasirian. Now you seek to do it again?" "I do not seek to defy our customs," Nasirian replied, her voice calm but strong. "I seek to honor them in a new way. Enkai should have the right to choose her own path, just as I did. If she wishes to marry, let her. But if she wishes to study, let her do that as well." Mzi Parejo frowned. "The Maasai have survived for centuries by following our traditions. Who are you to question them?" "I do not question our survival," Nasirian said, her eyes meeting his with unwavering determination. "I question why we must deny our daughters the right to dream. If we want our people to thrive in the future, we must give them the tools to do so." The silence that followed was heavy, but Nasirian stood her ground. She could feel the weight of her words sinking in, and though the elders were slow to change, she knew that her plea had planted a seed. Ole Pasha, who had been watching from the side, stepped forward. His face was unreadable, but when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. I will not force Enkai to marry, he said slowly, but the decision must be hers, not yours. Nasirian's heart swelled with relief. It was not a perfect victory, but it was enough. In the days that followed, Enkai's fate remained in her hands. With her father's reluctant blessing, she chose to follow in Nasirian's footsteps, pursuing her education rather than the life of a wife and mother, at least for now. Nasirian returned to Nairobi, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Though the road ahead would still be difficult, she knew that she had made a difference, not only for her sister, but for the future of their village. As she stood in the bustling city once more, she thought of Lekuta. She had heard from her mother that he had turned down his family's push for an arranged marriage, choosing instead to wait, whether for her or for his own reasons. She did not know, but Naserian smiled at the thought. In the end, everyone had the right to choose their own path. And so, Naserian continued her journey, a young Maasai woman who had dared to dream, to fight, and to carve a new future in a world caught between tradition and change.